Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And this week on the show, we are talking about Star Wars, The Princess and the Scoundrel by Beth Revis. So exciting. We finally have a Star Wars romance novel. And I'm excited to dive into it because, more book Leia, more Han, more adventuring post Return of the Jedi. I can't really ask for much else. We've been getting a lot of post ROTJ content this summer. It's been an ROTJ summer, I guess, in a way, between this and Shadow of the Sith.
Definitely. And I feel like the longer I sit with this book after having finished it, the more I think about how rich of a book it is and how much texture there is happening in this story. And after we talked to Beth, I'm just so excited to have a discussion with you about this book. So I'm happy to be here.
Well, before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping items up top. First of which, you and I went to C2E2. It was my first C2E2. I came out to your city.
Yes, my third C2E2? Question mark?
Yes. Yeah, I think we were talking about that. We were talking about it's a year of thirds. Third podcast, third C2E2. It's the year of third. And this is the third Del Rey book we're talking about this summer. Look at that.
Wow.
It's all connected.
It's all connected. Yes. What did you think of our beautiful city that you've definitely been to before? And also the convention, which was really all you saw of said city.
Yeah, it was a really fun convention. I enjoyed it a lot. I think it was pretty low key compared to what you get at Star Wars Celebration, which, all things considered, at Star Wars Celebration this year, I needed low key. So yeah. It was nice to have a bit of a change of pace, and there was a Star Wars presence of sorts there, between Claudia Gray, who we went to a spotlight panel for. You got to host or moderate a panel with Claudia, which was really cool.
I did. Yeah, it was really cool.
Then we got some photo ops with Moses Ingram and Vivian Lyra Blair, which was really exciting. That was definitely, I don't know about you, but for me, that was the highlight of the weekend.
It was really cool. And we also went to a panel with Billy D. Williams, which was fun. Yes. And it felt like our Kenobi redo, our Kenobi Thursday redo in the best way. I think we needed a redemption personally on that day for both of us. And I hope that I'm speaking for you too here, and that's accurate for you. But I hope that you got that kind of meeting Moses and Vivian and just kind of being in that sort of Star Wars energy still.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it was a redo because you hosted a panel and it didn't get interrupted by a fire alarm. So I think the universe was giving it back to you. Yeah,
right.
That was exciting. I was very happy. I was on edge the whole time. I was looking around, seeing where are the fire alarms in the room.
Right.
Where are the ones you pull? I'm gonna keep an eye on them. Nobody pulled those.
Is anybody in this room vaping too close to a fire alarm? Allegedly.
Who knows?
I don't know.
I
saw that on Facebook.
Watch. Yeah.
I had a good time, and it was also such a great Lego Star Wars summer vacation weekend for us, because how many times did we listen to Scarif Beach Party?
Way too many
times. And Brad was probably so frustrated with me.
Every single day. Yeah, we would just get in the car. We would just get in the car and it would just start playing because it was the last song that was playing on either of our phones. So our phones were just oh yeah, the last song, sure, why not? And then it would just start playing again. We were okay, we accept it. I think the worst part was finding out that it was on Apple Music, because then it gave us an easier way to listen to it.
Great part for me. I love it so much. And then we saw the summer vacation billboard and we were we're the Leonardo DiCaprio meme. That was really fun too. And we also
missed
saw
the photo the first time driving by it, but then the second day we got the photo because we knew.
Yeah, we prepared. But also, we saw some great people, some friends in the Chicago area there. And I would say that I had a great time. Thanks for coming to the city. What did you think of my dogs? Dog review. You better give them 10s out of 10s.
10s out of 10s. Echo is my boy. He's my BFF, my bestie, my good time boy. He likes butt rubs. Gotta love
really
it.
does.
Kilo is
He really does.
a little bit of a high energy ball of chaos for my tastes.
A little bit is an
I have a
understatement.
small pup who's the same way, so Kilo is just that, but 10 times larger. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
most importantly, I found deep dish pizza in the Chicago area that was gluten free. Thank you, Lou Malnati's. This is not a sponsored episode, but
but
if you can't have gluten like me, Lou Malnati's is the place because I ate like 2 deep dish pizzas the weekend. Hey,
yeah, and you can get the butter crust on the gluten free. So
yeah, it comes with
that's really
it. You don't have
important.
to add it.
But yeah, overall, I think it was a good time. I hope you would consider coming back to a C2E2 in the future.
Yeah, we'll see.
You're like never again.
We'll see what
No,
happens. We'll see what happens.
that's guys. Do you hear the no in that answer? I hear it all over that answer. That's gosh, ouch. It's fine.
It's very fun to just be super vague and then see what your reaction is, and that's exactly what I'm playing with your emotions right now. It's very fun.
Yep.
I'll be back. I'll be back to Chicago. If anything,
Sure.
for the pizza and the dogs.
Sure.
Yes.
I don't believe that. Anyway,
Hey,
not important.
hey, we're here. You'll see enough of me on Zoom. I doubt you'll want me to come back. We're here.
Oh, come on.
And we are talking about books. And speaking of book news, we didn't get any at C2E2, but hey, I think New York Comic Con is going to have a couple of surprises in a few months. But we did get something unexpectedly. And I wasn't sure if we would get any book news, but then you and I were talking. We're like, wait, there's like no books after Princess and Scoundrel that have been announced besides the High
Yeah.
Republic books. Like, that's really unusual. And then lo and behold, Friday, just out of the blue, unexpectedly, bombshell drops. We are getting Jedi Battle Scars by Sam Maggs. It's going to be a book about Cal Kestis, the Mantis crew. It's set in between Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. It's coming out on March 7th from Del Rey. So it's going to be an adult book.
I just got the chills.
I know, right?
Wow, you just like reading that paragraph. Whew. Anyway, it's fine. I'm excited.
Yeah, Jedi Survivor. Still amped for it. And then also the art of Jedi Survivor is coming from Dark Horse on May 2nd. So we don't know the date for Jedi Survivor, despite our anticipation and our excitement for that game, because woo-hoo-hoo, I'm going to put so many hours into that game. It's not even funny. But hey, this gets my hopes up that it's going to be around springtime, like maybe March, April. I'm going to assume it's going to coincide somewhat with Celebration. So who knows how that will all play out. Maybe they'll have demos at Celebration of the game. That would be pretty cool. So we'll see what happens. But I am so excited that we're getting more tie-in books for video games, because we had, Twilight Company by Alexander Freed. We had Inferno Squad by Christy Golden, both of which are like extremely well-written tie-in books for a video game. Like, you would think, video games, I'm going to skip that. But no, those are two really stellar books. And I'm assuming that Sam Maggs, who has worked on so many different things in video games, like Spider-Man, Anthem, like all these sorts of games, she's going to pack a punch for this one. Feels like she's like a perfect choice.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I love Cal Kestis so much, and I'm excited that we're kind of getting a bridge in between these two games, because doesn't Jedi Survivor take place like 5 years later or something like that? I could be spouting nonsense, but
not
I feel like
sure.
I read that on the internet somewhere.
I think it's like 1 year or 5 years. It's like one of those two.
Okay, that's fair.
I'm not 100% sure though.
So kind of, you know what? No, it is. Hold on, hold the phone. I'm pulling this straight from my memory, but it is like, I think it is 5 years later, because he's not with the crew anymore based on the trailer, and like he's going at it alone and he's in a different place. I think everything goes to crap for him over time. So I'll be curious to know what things are like before they go to crap, or perhaps how they go to crap. So yeah, I don't know. I'm really excited about it. Battle Scars, great title. Looking forward to the pain.
Yeah, it is actually 5 years. I just confirmed on Wikipedia. That's actually a really long time. Yeah, I'm excited. Battle Scars sounds very sad. I imagine Cal's going to be dealing with some stuff.
Trauma.
Capital T trauma with the loss of his master, and maybe what he's still going through now that he is, face down Vader and face down Trilla in the end. And, we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Dude, everything is sad. And we're getting Inquisitors in this game. So I would expect like perhaps an Inquisitor to show up here in the book again. So I don't know. The game looks great. The book sounds great. We know nothing, but I'm excited. Count me in. Day one, I'll be there.
Yes, we will be there, and we'll be talking about it here on the podcast, the book and the game. So if you want to hear more of our thoughts next year, stay tuned because we'll have lots to say. Speaking of things to say and things we're talking about, Princess and the Scoundrel. That's why we're here today. And we just did an interview with author Beth Revis over on our podcast feed. So if you haven't listened to that episode, it's very, very light on spoilers. We talked all about her process working through this book and many of the themes that we're going to hone in on today in our discussion, as well as some of the character beats between Han and Leia. So it was a great conversation. Go check it out. Enjoy it for yourselves, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of Beth and bookstores, it's that time again for the independent bookstore of the week. Woo! Yes. Okay. Yay. This week's independent bookstore, this episode's independent bookstore, is none other than Malaprop's Bookstore and Cafe in beautiful downtown Asheville, North Carolina. This is a bookstore that Beth has worked with and that is nationally known. They have tons of events throughout the year and book clubs. So if you're in the area, join a book club. Who doesn't love book clubs?
I love book clubs. It's basically what we do here.
We kind of do a book club. Yeah, right. Exactly. But Malaprop's Bookstore and Cafe is an independent bookstore founded in 1982. They enjoy bringing books, writers, and readers together in an environment that nurtures community and the joy of reading. They also have the Cozy Cafe. They offer treats from local bakeries and coffee roasted locally. And so they are a great place in the downtown area to visit. And they were founded by Amoka Biratz. I apologize if I've mispronounced her name. But she says she has a love of books that came from her grandmother. And when she got this space, she kind of invested all the money into inventory because the rent was nearly free in this abandoned downtown state, and kind of built up this store and in helping to build up the area as well. Also, finally, Malaprop's is a silly name, and I wondered what was with the name, and they have a whole section, what is with the name, on their About Us page. So Malaprop's Bookstore and Cafe at malaprops.com. That is MALAPROPS.com. They ship.
Yes, and they have Princess and the Scoundrel copies. I believe some are autographs.
As long as they still have them.
Yes, at the time of this recording, they have 15 on hand as of August 20th, it says here on their website. So go check them out. Support indie bookstores if you can. There are so many good books coming out right now between so many amazingly talented authors. And the most you can do is not buy from giant corporations who don't need your money if you're able to, because these indie booksellers really appreciate it, and it's how they make their living. So go do that. It's great. So thank you for sharing, Sarah, another bookstore of the week here on the podcast. And with that being said, let's turn it over to our discussion on The Princess and the Scoundrel by Beth Revis.
I love you.
I know.
We're talking about The Princess and the Scoundrel. Spoilers ahead. So be warned, if you haven't read this book, we're diving into the nitty, the gritty, the kissy, the huggy, all of it, all of the stuff. I was just continuing with the Y at the end of every word.
Yeah, I mean it worked. It worked.
Yeah. So Sarah, when you and I first heard about this book, we were like, "Yay, romance! We want more hugging. We want more kissing in Star Wars." That's like your and I's niche with Star Wars. That's why we love Elzar Mann so much. But hey,
I mean, yes. Yes.
Neither of us have read Courtship of Princess Leia, but I think that was the most thought of Han and Leia romance in Legends. And then immediately when this was announced, people were like, oh my God, finally like a new canonical book that will dive into these two characters and what married life is like, and the wedding specifically, and the honeymoon, like all the things that we would want with these two characters. And so I was so excited that we finally get to dive into it. And I think, again, like Return to the Jedi, there's so much ground to cover between that movie and Aftermath, which would be like the earliest of the books within that time period on the timeline. So this is now, in the immediate aftermath of the movie. What did you
Mhm.
think of this book, and what's running through your mind now that you've gotten into it?
Well, first of all, I saw that cover and I was like, "Ooh, it's so good. It's so good." It has the kind of like classic romance cover styling to Han and Leia, and we have, the stormtroopers because of course we're going to have a bit of the Empire remnants as well as the aftermath on Endor after the Death Star. And I was excited, really kind of energized by the way that the cover looks, and I was brought in, to the story because of that. It's such a welcome image for this story. Getting into the book itself, I really ultimately had a great time with it. I think that Beth was able to really dive into both Leia and Han and their emotional states and the complicated nature of the war and how they feel now in kind of the aftermath of the war and what it means for them interpersonally. And so I loved that aspect. I think there's some great romantic moments in this book. I think there is some great adventure in this book. I think there is funny moments and thoughtfulness, and it all ties together quite well. I will say that I do have a couple of like slightly more critical thoughts, and they come from my own just like my own desire for there to be more kissing. I wish it were even more romancy. But I know that this is a Star War, so that's not always what we're gonna get here. But I was really grateful for what we did get. And then, I did feel that we slowed down in the pace a little bit towards the middle before it picked up again on Madurs, with the kind of Empire coming in full force. But like once it got past the pace just kind of slowing a little bit, it really picked back up again. And none of that, even the slow part, felt unnecessary. It all felt within the story. It just kind of did fluctuate a little bit. So my overall thoughts are a really solid entry into the canon. I'm really thrilled with the introspection of the characters. I love Book Leia more than anything else in the world because we can dive into her thought processes. And I just felt overall that this was a great story. And I would, once again, love to see more from Beth Revis because her work is great.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think Beth's voice in Star Wars publishing has been extraordinary between this and Rebel Rising, like two standout books for me, honestly. And what she does really well is you hit the nail on the head, like get into the psyches of these characters, right? Like it's not
Mm-hmm.
simply just a romance, it's also a book about two characters who are dealing with a sense of self and like trying to figure out who they are now that the war is on the verge of ending, because it's not quite over. I mean, it is over because the Emperor is dead and the Death Star is destroyed, but there are clearly remnants out there and there's Imperial loyalists. So there's all this really messiness happening in the galaxy, and Han and Leia are now husband and wife, but also like Leia's dealing with the fact that Darth Vader's your father, so she has that. Han lost a year of his life, he's dealing with that. So there's a bit of fear with these two characters, a bit of trauma that they're working through. And I think that's really great too, to have those moments where they're not together, but they're maybe off doing their own thing and going through their own thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
That's the power of Beth as a writer, and why I loved Rebel Rising so much and getting into Jyn Erso psyche, and like why is she the way she is? Like why is she so closed off in Rogue One where those walls are built up, right? So that's a huge success for me in this book. And again, I just love this time period in general. So getting more within this is really exciting. Seeing Endor, seeing the Halcyon. I know people were really skeptical of it, including the Halcyon, and like it was sort of the corporate synergy. We keep saying synergy. It's the corporate
The
synergy
synergy
of it all.
machines.
Like, the Halcyon just launched. Let's include it in the book. And like, maybe there's an element of that, but ultimately, like, I don't think it's distracting in a way, and it's more so just another location for the story to take place on. And like, where else would Han and Leia go besides like a galactic starliner that is Chandrillan, and Mon Mothma is from Chandrilla, and that's like a huge component of the book, is like, hey, go on this. So it looks good for me, it looks good for the galaxy, tourism can flourish again, it's not as dangerous anymore, let's do this thing. And so there's a political side to it as well, besides the capitalism above all of it. It's definitely there, but I don't think it's distracting in any way. And the world building too is so excellent. Madurs is an incredibly cool planet. I'm glad that we have more ice planets that are not just Hoth. And I was really happy for Beth to give us some new flavor with the way that art and architecture is a core component of this planet, and how they organize their culture around those two things. So I thought it was really fascinating. I'm really happy we have this book, and I'm just excited to talk about it.
Definitely. I'm right there with you. So let's do it, is my thought.
Yeah. Yeah. So for us to really set the tone of this book, I think we should hit on the time period right off the bat. This is the closest look that we've gotten at galactic politics and like what's happening in the galaxy after the Death Star is blown up, since Shattered Empire, because that's the comic. I forget who wrote it, but it was one of the Journey to the Force Awakens pieces of literature back in 2015. Features Shara Bay, Cass Dameron, Luke, Han, and Leia, and all of that's really hinted at in this book. You can really see this is a continuation of that in some ways right in the beginning, because they're coming back from those missions that they start off with in the comic, which is taking out a lot of different Imperial cells on the planet of Endor, like different, because the planet's big. There's a lot of Empire on Endor besides where we see in the movie. I just thought it was really interesting how it seems like it's a time period of uncertainty, right? Like you would think by the end of Return of the Jedi, it's like, oh, everything's great, like happily ever after. The galaxy
we get
lived
a yub
well.
nub and or a victory celebration,
Right. Yeah. And so like this book is dealing with the fact that no, that's not the case at all. Things are actually kind of bad. There's still uncertainty. People aren't believing that the Imperial force is like gone for good. And I think a lot of things are just in fluctuation. Like there's riots on Coruscant, there's unrest in the Mid-Rim, hyperspace lanes are pretty unsafe. Like, what did you get from just how the galaxy looks in the aftermath of the Battle of Endor? Like, what did you pick up on? Like, what was of interest to you, in helping to like set the tone of this book, and also like what our characters are dealing with?
Yeah. So like for me, I feel like books are the perfect medium for this time period and for stories like this, because, the movies, they're not about Han and Leia. They include Han and Leia, but they're not about Han and Leia. And so, we don't necessarily dive into their psyches, in the movies, or let them kind of process their trauma in the movies. That's what Luke gets to do in a way. And so the books are a great space for that. And that goes hand in hand with explaining the lack of a happily ever after, that we get at Return of the Jedi with this world. I mean, the book itself opens with Leia contemplating, this stormtrooper helmet that she's holding, and the fact that this was a person, was just recently a person. And so I think kind of that it could be a little jarring to some readers, but I think that immediate opening of the book really helps to set the tone for where we're at, and the way that war doesn't just end one day and then it's a happily ever after the next day. It's a really complicated journey to get back to some sense of normality or some sense of familiarity, because all of those things that were, bombed, or all of those things that were put into place through a regime still linger, over time. And I do think that we see that in this book, and we see kind of how characters like Mon Mothma are thinking about that and trying to work through that in real time. So I find this just an exciting time period to mine, especially in the book world. I mean, we both enjoy the Aftermath trilogy. We both really love the Alphabet Squadron trilogy as well. And so to get another story that's set right after Return of the Jedi, I think is really exciting. And I think right up both of our alleys, if I speak for you as well.
Yeah, I loved like the first 100 or so pages where they're having all of these meetings and talking about the difficulties of, okay, now that the Empire is gone, like what's next? That's just so cool to be inside the war room, like seeing those conversations happen. The fact that, we're already talking about, okay, Leia, you have people that are going after you already, and we have to figure out a contingency plan for you to be safe, right? And like the Hutts have already put a bounty on Leia's head, which is not something I'd ever thought would have happened. But yeah, it makes total sense that, the Hutts would be after Leia. So she's made as many adversaries as she has allies. And so it's like, what do they do now to bring as many planets as possible into the Republic, into the New Republic, and that's a lot of the impetus for her to go to Madurs and sidetrack their journey on the Halcyon is like this planet that has a huge resource of cardium, and what that could mean for, like, there's a fuel crisis happening, there's a supply chain issue happening, like things that are not entirely unfamiliar with what we're going through right now with, like,
Ouch.
rising gas prices and supply chain issues. So, speaking of Star Wars being allegory to our own world, it definitely shines through. Did you pick up on some of that? And you're like kind of Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the book. You're like, oh my God, supply chain. It's all people talk about.
Yeah, I mean, at times I think it's most prevalent within conversations in this book with regards to the Hollow News and how the Hollow News treats Leia and how Leia views the value or lack thereof of the Hollow News. And I think there's something to be said about the allegory there. I don't think it's, like the strongest theme throughout or the strongest idea throughout the book. And that's not saying that in a disparaging way. It's just more like, this is not what the book necessarily focuses on. But like, yeah, it definitely pops up and it makes a lot of sense as to why all these things are occurring. And it fits right into the other stories of this time period that we've gotten. Yeah, I think it's so fascinating that we watch Mom Mothma in this book, and I've mentioned it twice, but watch her think about how the New Republic ought to be received in order to inspire unity and confidence in a future that isn't quite realized yet. And I think that can be very difficult to do because the gains are not going to come as quickly as the falls did initially, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there are going to be a lot of growing pains.
Right. And it's a lot more difficult, especially with regards to, media and politics. It's a lot more difficult to reassure someone or inspire confidence in his success than it is to fearmonger or oppress. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and Leia is dealing with the fact that she is used to being slandered in Imperial run news feeds. And so it's interesting for her now to be on the side of like, oh, here, the princess is married. She's on her honeymoon. Like, things are great. And there's a part in the beginning where I think Mon is like, well, the war's over. And Leia's like, well, the war is not over. She's like, yes, but we have to show on the holo feeds that like the war is over. It's interesting to see the way in which, the spin is happening within Star Wars that like, hey, the Imperials are totally gone. And it's like, don't underestimate the Imperials at all, because they're gonna start forming. Like, we know from Aftermath that Ray Sloan is out there, and that one guy, I forget what his name is, the one dude she kind of butts heads with throughout the whole trilogy.
I know exactly who you're talking about, and like the name is just not happening in my brain.
Yeah. But we know for a fact that the Imperials are on the galaxy's edge, and Han makes a point like during this first meeting when Mothma is talking all about the core worlds and the mid rim and like how that's where our focus needs to be. But Han's like, no, our focus needs to be on the outer rim, because if we don't, like, that's where the true battle is going to happen. Like, and it is like we see in The Mandalorian, everything happening in The Mandalorian with Moff Gideon and these like cloning facilities on Navarro, like that's all in the outer rim. Like, that's where they're going to build their presence, because the Republic is overlooking that territory. And it's just interesting how that will be a blind spot for them in the many years to come.
Gallius Rax? Gallius Rax is who you're talking about.
Gallius Rax. Yes.
Okay. I'm really glad we just figured that out. We just needed to have that moment of like, yes, these characters. I was like, it starts with a G, but I couldn't place it. So we've got it now, guys.
Oh my gosh, real fans. Gallius Rax. But yeah, do you see that as a blind spot for the New Republic / the Rebellion? Is just this like over optimism and the fact that they're maybe focused on the wrong things and the wrong places and the wrong people initially, and that could be a detriment to them later down the line?
I don't know. I don't think so. If you want to inspire people back to that version of normality, you kind of have to put forward this particular front. You have to create a narrative, right? And they are doing that with some success over time here. And does the Battle of Jakku come? Yes. But part of me thinks that would have happened either way. Like, I don't think it's necessarily productive from a political standpoint to be like, yeah, the emperor's dead, the war's not over. And everybody's like, but the emperor's dead, you know? And what am I supposed to do about that? The emperor's dead. You killed him and the war's still not over?
Right.
That doesn't inspire confidence. So like, I think it's a mushy spot politically, because it doesn't feel necessarily all right all the time to us. I feel like that could be a little something to criticize, perhaps. But that's the methodology that they felt was most necessary to build their own reputation and establish themselves as leaders in this new sphere. So I don't know if I actually answered your question, but I'm working through a thought.
Yeah, no, I think you make a great point. Like, they do have to have some sort of narrative, and it's interesting that when they have that narrative, and there's people on the Halcyon who there's the one guy, I forget what his name is, but it is, if I pull it up here,
Is it
his
Keelad?
name. No, it's the Philbert Carta, who he specializes in romantic thriller entertainment feeds.
Oh my gosh.
The fact that like Leia doesn't know who he is, and she's like, I hope he hates the fact that I don't know who he is, because quote, no bane like obscurity. But the fact that he's like, oh no, the emperor's actually alive, and you guys have to push the narrative that he's dead in order to establish yourself within the Republic, right? So it's like almost like a damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? It's like if you say the war is continuing and like, hey, we need to like take this seriously, then you might not inspire confidence. But then if you do try to inspire confidence, then you're going to create these people, or these like kind of conspiracy theorists who are like, well, actually, I want to go against the grain, and I want to say the emperor is actually alive and well, and you know, whatever they want to believe in. It is very gray. It is very messy.
Yeah, and I definitely think that there's some of that we've been talking about over the past 10 minutes or so that can really be applied or viewed as a lens to our real world, for sure, because we're living in a complex time, that's for sure.
We're talking about politics because you and I love a Star Wars politic, but also like we're getting so much Mothma content soon with her in the Senate and like dealing with these sorts of issues, you know, like going from Republic to Empire. And then this book is going from Empire to Republic with Mothma at the center as well.
We love our girl, Mon Mothma.
It's really, really exciting stuff. I love it. So we're going to jump over from the time period of this book, which is still fascinating. All these things are great. And I love that Beth builds out the galaxy as it is from a political and socioeconomic standpoint. I think that's really important for a book like this. And I love the fact that even though it is Leia's honeymoon and her wedding, she's still thinking about these things, right? Like she can't get her mind off of work. And maybe that's one of her problems. But let's talk about Leia to start and the many roles that she takes on.
So we got past the politics part, and now we're getting to the best part, the kissing part, which is obviously way more important, obviously. But no,
obviously,
we're going to talk about Leia here. Leia is dealing with so much in this book and working through the various identities that she has in her day-to-day life, which have only seemed to multiply here in the aftermath of Return of the Jedi. And it's really interesting because, you know, not only is she just herself, at the end of the day, she is just herself. She's a fighter and a leader in a war. She's something of a galactic spokesperson, and Mon kind of puts her in this public position to be watched and to be observed. She is somebody who has recently learned that she's a sister. She is a daughter not only to Bail and Bria, who she has love and fondness for, but also to Darth Vader, who she does not have any fondness for, and she is taking on a new role as a wife as well. And so she is having to, you know, work through all of these things at the exact same time, you know, this change in her familial relationships. And I would imagine that would be difficult for anybody. And I'm glad it's also difficult for Leia. And I don't mean that in like a bad way, but like, Leia, she's one of us, you know?
Yeah.
I think she can often be seen as a larger than life character. And I love when we can get in the books and really dive into what she's thinking about and understand that she's a person just like any other who just um, perseveres through what so many would see as insurmountable trauma and life experience.
Mm-hmm. There was one thing that I really think encapsulates a lot of what Leia goes through in this book, and it's the idea of joy.
Mm.
Whether it's her as a wife or her as a sister or her as a daughter, the idea that her whole life she has always thought of joy coming from safety, right? It's like why she's a fighter. It's why she does what she does and like brings other worlds to safety in order for them to find joy. And it's not until she gets to the Halcyon where she talks with Riola, and Riola is saying that there's actually safety in joy, right? So rather than joy and safety, like getting safe and then being joyous from that, there's actually a sense of safety that can come from just being joyous in the first place. And I think that's something that Leia has to work through in terms of her being with Han and the way that she thinks. She's been very independent her whole life, and she's sort of had this attitude that like I have to work by myself in order to preserve the safety of the people around me, right? Like so they can have joy
Mm-hmm.
in their own safety. Like I need to be alone. I need to work by myself. I can't have Bail be connected to me and then me be connected to the rebellion because that threatens the safety of the rebellion. So this is who I am. And I think something she deals with in the book is figuring out she actually has to work as a team with her husband, with Han, and utilize that to her advantage, and also recognize that she can actually have safety from the joy of being with her husband and from marrying Han. Right? Did you get the sense of that being a pretty prominent thing for Leia in this book, like finding joy and like what joy, like the
Yeah.
changing definition of joy for her?
Yeah. I feel that this conversation that happens about joy in safety versus safety in joy is one that is really thoughtful and profound because one comes from an action and one comes from an emotion. And you hit the nail on the head when you talked about Leia as someone who needs to be working for others in order to ensure their safety and finding some peace and joy in that. She's always moving forward. And she's gone through so much. I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that she felt really strongly after the loss of Alderaan. And you know, we have both read that last line of Leia, Princess of Alderaan, and it hurts. And you know, when all of that joy is taken from her, she goes back to really being action oriented in order to reclaim some of that for herself. And I think that this change in perspective for her, joy in safety, or pardon me, safety in joy. I'm gonna get my sequencing
It's
mixed
gonna
up here.
happen multiple times for us.
Right. But like safety
Yeah.
in joy is the idea that just being yourself and feeling what you feel brings you peace, happiness, joy. It can also bring you to dissatisfaction or a lack of safety too if you're not feeling that joy. But that joy can bring with it its own sense of security because it is an emotion that binds people together in a positive way.
Yeah, you and I really got talking about this when we were listening to the audiobook in the car all weekend at C2E2, but there was a fight, like I think with their first major fight in the book where Han says, or Leia tells him, like, you knew you were marrying a politician and an ambassador and like all these things that are who I am. And he's like, no, I thought I was marrying you. And we talked about that line
We
for
had
a
a
little bit. And we were
complicated
like,
opinion about this.
yeah, we were like, what does he mean by that? Like, what is he trying to get at? And you and I think both came to the conclusion that they are each right and wrong in the way that they're approaching this whole honeymoon. And like, I think where we landed was the fact that they're not working together as a team. Like, Han is not really expressing himself properly. And then on the flip side, I think Leia is not seeing the time that she could give Han and the way that they could come up with a plan together, right? It's like not keeping him in the dark. And then I think as she starts to ponder that conversation, it's when she realizes, oh, I do believe in like unification and the power of alliances. Like that's what defeated the Empire. But like somewhere over the last couple of years, I've really been isolating myself.
Mm-hmm.
And she starts to like work through that emotion of like, why is she doing that? And like, why is she even isolating herself from Han? And like Han recognizes that she's putting on this sort of mask that she typically only dons like in the public presence or in like a war room. And he's like wondering like, why is that happening with Leia, like with me? Like, and it was just us two in a room together, like in our own bedroom. Right. Um, it goes back to like Mothma's worry too, that she said, you got to have some time for yourself. And even Bail, she says, Bail often fretted about you. He was always in awe of the way you stepped up. You are so giving, Leia, and he loved that about you. But he did worry that you would sacrifice too much of yourself in helping others. So I know without a single doubt that he would be proud you choose to celebrate joy now in this moment. Right? Like she's so worried about the wedding and the honeymoon. She's like, no, I got to work. And Mothma's like, no, you gotta have some joy for yourself because it's so hard to find. You've worked so hard and lost so much.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to the quote that you brought up to bring up this whole conversation about the fight that they had, and Han saying, you know, I wasn't marrying those things. I was marrying you. And you mentioned how we both thought they were a little bit right and a little bit wrong in that conversation. And you were right in saying that it does really kind of expose where they're at, because Leia is doing 6 full-time jobs, you know?
Right.
And she is using every bit of her energy to be all of these people, to work all of these jobs, and to be a hero, capital H, a hero. And I don't think she realizes that she can take off that identity, or not take off that identity, but like not let that be her prominent identity when she is with him. You know, like at the end of the day, she has to come home and still be just Leia. And I definitely think that's complicated for her to comprehend. And then on the other hand, with Han, I feel like Han has to be a little bit like, has to understand a little bit more her point of view and understand how she's gone about surviving the past, 5 years of their life, or however long we get in the original trilogy spans. Because, she is doing all of these things not only to help others, but truly to help herself in the aftermath of the explosion on Alderaan. She keeps fighting for a purpose. It's not because of nothing. And it's throughout this book that they kind of figure out how to learn how to work together and see eye to eye on that statement of who they were marrying.
Mm-hmm.
That's the eternal challenge of marriage, right? To how can I better understand my partner? How can I work together better with my partner every day? And how can they merge all their identities for themselves and then merge that identity with my identity as a partner? The human experience is complicated, as Han and Leia
really
are continuing to find out in marriage.
But I think one thing this book does really well is totally squash the idea that they have a troubled marriage, in my opinion. Like, I know they get to a point where they're going to be off on their own, doing their own things. But at the end of the day, these are two people who care deeply about each other, and they're always going to have that connection. Like it's what is symbolized in the ring that Han gives Leia at the end of the book, which is the one that she wears in The Last Jedi. That purple, the 2 globes, little circular things on her ring, representing each of them, and they're separated on the ring, but they're eventually interwoven by the metal bindings, the gold metal plating on the ring. So it's supposed to symbolize no matter what, no matter how far apart they are, they will always be together in each other's hearts. Like that, like time, distance, any of that can't separate them.
Brad, explain the visual that you're getting of me right now.
Folks, Sarah is getting up from her seat, and she is in the yelling position. I don't know what's about to happen.
Beth, you gosh darn genius. That's what I'm here to say, quite loudly towards my microphone. Are you kidding me? It. I foolishly did not realize that this was the ring that we see in TLJ until Brad sent me, like a clickbait article about it, and I was like, it's so good. It's so good. And there are moments like that throughout this book. I mean, even the whole symbolism of the rings that they get from the tree in the wedding ceremony, and the
Yes.
amber, and how those fall off, how they break, and how they have to come together after that moment. But like, oh my gosh, we love the tying together of the pretty jewelry from TLJ. It means something big. It means something
Yeah.
big.
It's so symbolic though, because I think, again, this book proves they had anything but a troubled marriage. Like, yes, they have their disagreements, and there's a bit of a learning curve with accepting every aspect of each other. There's this really great quote from Han, when he's pondering the fact that Leia is Vader's daughter. And Vader is somebody that he is so terrified of, and he had to live a full year in carbonite with those emotions trapped inside of him. But he has found a place to separate Vader and Leia. Like, even though those two things are intertwined, she is the offspring of Darth Vader and of Anakin Skywalker. Han is probably the only person in the galaxy besides Luke Skywalker that can separate Leia from Vader. He is always going to be her cheerleader. He is going to be somebody that loves her unconditionally, no matter what. And I think that's what she learns in this book. And she learns that, okay, like, this is going to be a guy who's always going to have my back. If like my secret ever gets out, like, Han is going to be there for me.
Definitely.
And Han thinks here, quote, Leia fractured herself for everyone. The strong warrior for the rebellion, the savvy politician for the Senate, the gracious leader for the people. But she was, while in front of him, multifaceted and sometimes cracked, but whole. And then he's thinking, I can't choose one aspect. I can't choose another. I have to choose all or nothing. And it says he chose all. And I think that just speaks volumes of Han. Like, he knows the difficulty of who she is and like what her job entails, but like, he chooses all of those things regardless. And I think for him, it's just going to be a matter of voicing that properly.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely growth from the argument, in towards the beginning of the book, where he realizes that all these aspects are part of her, and all that he asks from her is to be her most authentic self when she's with him. And I think that she's going to ask the same of Han, every day in their marriage, and I think that that's really important for both of them as they juggle a really complicated set of circumstances.
So we started talking about the idea of joy, and I think that is we are a podcast that finds joy. Like, that's kind of our thing. That's our like motto, I guess. But I think
we keep saying it over and over.
I think joy is like the most important emotion ever. Like, I think it is something that can be found in the darkest of times. Hope kind of comes and goes, and it's really a shaky feeling sometimes, especially when things really seem bad. But I feel like joy is one of those things that can always exist, even in the darkest times. If you can find something that you can derive joy from, or even something that you dislike as a whole, but if there are things within that you find joy in, like that's the emotion you can take away from it. And there's this quote here from Leia. It says, joy was one of those emotions, like love, that burst forth unbidden and even unwarranted. It wasn't manufactured or cultivated, it simply was. And if one was in a position to feel joy, that necessarily meant that there was at least some safety wrapped around one's soul.
It's that right there.
Yeah. And when thinking of Han's proposal, she says she had felt joy in the question, and that joy had happened because for the first time and as long as she could remember, she had felt safe. When there was no security, hope was the thing to hold on to. But once the ground was firm under one's feet, it was possible for joy to exist. So, we think about the idea, like I was just saying, of hope and joy. You hope for better times, and once those better times do come, joy can exist. I still do think, contrary to what she might be thinking here, like joy can exist even in darker times, and when maybe the ground isn't as firm as you can want it to be. It is hard to find joy, but it's there, right? Would you agree with that? Like, even in the darkest times and in the brightest, joy exists.
Yeah, because hope, I think, is something that can be difficult to hold on to, if that makes sense. It becomes warier over time if the things aren't changing for you and changing in the circumstances. But joy is something that can be felt over and over again and not lose its shine. if that makes sense. Like
I could have a terrible day and be like, the world's on fire. But if I go on TikTok and I see like 10 cat videos in a row, I feel joy and all is
exactly.
well.
Exactly. Like, or if I watch David Byrne's American Utopia today, it's going to bring me that same level of joy that it brought me in October 2020. Every time I watch it, it doesn't change for me. Like I still, that sense of how it makes me feel is something I can hang on to. And over time, that joy can become hope if it happens more frequently, you know? So,
and more
it's
joy
like,
can derive itself from hope too.
right. And it's this spinning kind of cycle forward as more momentum builds up.
She's pondering all of this, and Leia thinks to herself, she didn't want a medal or a prestigious appointment, but she longed for the freedom to accept at least a little joy. She had never really considered before that it wasn't something bestowed by peace at the end of war. It was something waiting for her to claim, only if she could allow herself to do so. So I think that's a key there is like, will you allow yourself to claim joy, or will you hold back? Will you deny yourself joy?
Mm.
I think that is, especially as we think of our careers and our work-life balance. Leia being somebody, like you said, has like 6 positions all at once. Like, will she take a step back for a moment to accept joy into her life? Like, as us as working people, will we become mules to our jobs? Like, will we work to live, or do we live to work? Right. And I'm somebody that likes to work to live. I go to work, I do my thing, I come home, and I find joy. Right. And this marriage, I think for Leia is exactly what she needed. I think for Han, it's exactly what he needed. They both needed each other. More than Han needed oxygen, he needed Leia. And I don't know, did you just love like these really quiet moments with them throughout the book? Like where he lifts her off her feet, thinks about the height difference, they're kissing in the room.
Can we talk about that cover? Hold on. You mentioned he thinks about the height difference, and I want to be clear on exactly what that quote is. I am paraphrasing it, but it's essentially like Leia was the same distance to Han as Han was to Chewie. And I'm like, what are you saying, Han?
Oh, man.
I'm like, wait a second. Bestie,
lot to unpack.
What are you thinking about when you think about that? Like,
but I loved so many of the moments with these two in this book. Like when the kissing did happen, and like when the romance was there, and like the tension between them, like the fact that no words were spoken the night they got married, right? And they're on the Falcon in like this cramped bunk bed that's like kind of dirty, but like they're probably making love on there. Like I don't know, it makes me happy that they can find joy despite the galaxy and all of its messiness.
Right. I think that's a really important idea, that they can find joy despite the galaxy's messiness, especially in the Star War, like on the consumer, fan side of this. So many of these stories are so heavy and they're dark, and they're good versus evil, and good prevails, but not without some real struggle, not without some real dark days. And so, yes, to have these moments where the happiness, where the joy, where the intimacy and the romance of it all is put at the forefront for these characters and for the reader, like I think that's a really valuable thing, because dare I bring it up again? One lone candle can ignite the stars. Okay, dare I bring it up again? I just did. That I think that's not a message that we get all the time in the Star Wars when it comes to romantic, intimate relationships. And I really like that was a major piece of the story for these characters in this time frame.
Well, and love being the strongest form of rebellion is something that spoke to Beth in writing this book, and she sees it as one of the key themes, and it makes total sense, right? I mean, the only reason they are able to get the Empire off of Madurs is because they actually figure out, hey, we have to work together. Our love for each other is actually an asset. It's something that we can use to our advantage because like we understand each other. So let's use that sense of understanding and that love in order to push forward and rebel against the Empire on this planet. And like that is what wins out the day. That's what wins out the war against the Empire. It's this love of people, right? And like the fact that the rebellion is not just like is not like the Empire. Like they value relationships with each other, and they bring out the strength in each other. Love, both romantically and platonically, I think is such an important piece of Star Wars. It's the love of your friends and your family and your partners.
Absolutely. And I'm right there with you. And I hope that we continue to see stories where both that romantic sense of love and the platonic sense of love are prioritized in a way that isn't always traumatic for the
Mhm.
characters. Uh, anyway, like I love me some Hera and Kanan, but ouch.
Also very sad.
You
Jedi Knight
know?
still scarred. As much as the mushy stuff was in here too, did you feel like there was a nice balance with mushy and teasing? Like with Leia kind of saying funny things to Han, like you just can't throw people out an airlock, Han, and Han
Oh
being like,
yeah.
"Hey, I'm not just a scoundrel. I'm a scoundrel who came back with a pie." You know, like when he eats 4 pies in the hallway on his way back to his room, which like super relatable as a pizza eater myself.
Right.
Pizza
You just gotta
pie.
get that pizza pie.
But did you feel like there was a good balance with these two in terms of like the teasing and the mushiness?
Oh, 100%. I think Beth really nailed the banter that they have back and forth and the romance between these two characters just perfectly. They feel so perfectly, the characters that you know from the movies, but elevated in the book form. So yeah, I was
Yeah.
really satisfied with the way that they felt on the page and the way that they interacted with one another.
So we've talked a lot about Leia and Han's relationship and their marriage and this idea of joy. Do you want to talk about parentage and lineage and bloodlines for Leia specifically? Because that's a huge component of this book as well.
Yeah. This is either my most favorite Star Wars topic or my least favorite Star Wars topic, depending on the situation. But here it is my most favorite Star Wars topic because Leia has 4 parents who are all equally and incredibly prolific and strong and complicated and interesting and influential to her throughout her life. And we see Leia reflecting on both her memories of Bail and Bria, as well as the coming to terms or at least starting to work through the fact that she is Darth Vader / Anakin Skywalker's daughter and what that means for her. And the first time I cried in this book, there were like 3 or 4 times, was a conversation that Leia's having with herself about what her wedding day was supposed to look like if Alderaan was still there. And there is this memory that she's thinking about with her mother and how her mother would place the sword, the Rindon sword, on her side, and she would get married wearing that sword. And she never thought that was in the cards for her. And ultimately, when she does choose to get married now here on Endor, she does not have necessarily her family by her side. And then the second time I cried was when we were in that wedding scene and she feels like she feels the presence of her parents and that sword being placed on her side. And I was like, can she feel them in the Force, man? Like, I'm fine. What are your thoughts on that whole idea that's presented throughout the early part of the book about Bail and Bria?
Yeah, I when I first got our copy of the book and I read the prologue and there was already a Bail and Brea mention in it, I was like, this is gonna be really good. It's gonna make me cry several times probably. And I was right. I was completely right.
Yeah.
I think another idea in this book about defining who you are is so key to Leia's character, because she's like, am I an Organa? Am I Darth Vader's offspring? Right. She mentions the fact at one point that Luke keeps calling him Anakin, not Vader, which I love the idea of Leia thinking about the words Anakin Skywalker. I just like that. It's very interesting. And that Luke had said, Vader died with hope, with pride for his son. And she's like, what pride does Vader have for me? The fact that I escaped the mind probe and like resisted it, like, is that his pride for his daughter? Is just like I'm kind of powerful, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, he tortured her and then he blew up her planet.
It's like, what pride does Vader actually have? She's like, screw your pride, basically. I don't care. Like, my pride is with my adoptive parents, Bail and Brea.
Yeah, and he's directly responsible for some of my worst trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And the death of everyone I knew and loved. And I'm supposed to just forgive him?
Yeah, she blames both Vader and Tarkin for stealing everything from her. She thinks that her grief came in shards, which is such a striking visual, like almost like glass cutting you. Every time it's remembered, it's just like a painful shard of glass in your side. Like it's just
Mm-hmm.
horrible. She remembers a Penza Peak, which we know from Princess of Alderaan, the scent of flowers, her old toy droid Lola, which
Ouch.
was an amazingly heartbreaking inclusion. I was not expecting a Lola reference in this
Did
book.
you text me like, do you think Lila was on Alderaan when it blew up?
Yeah, I
Was that
tweeted
you
it out
or
and people were not
okay, you
happy with
tweeted it.
me
Yeah,
for
no,
putting that thought into the
I
universe.
was not happy with you for that.
You're rejecting it. Yeah. We can reject
Yeah.
it. It's fine. Lola was somewhere else at that point in time. She was on
Mm-hmm.
vacation. The fact that like none of these things can be recreated or passed on, right? Like she lost so much of her life, and Bale and Brea are a part of that as well. And the fact that she can't strap the Rindon sword around herself at her wedding, and that Brea can't be there. Um, she kind of goes back and forth during her wedding. Like, is this real? Is what I'm feeling real? Is it not real? Like she feels Bale's scruffy beard against her cheek, like when he plants a kiss on her cheek, right? Like she feels like it's there, but she looks and it's not. But at the same time, she's like, no, it is real. Like
It's all in the forest,
maybe it is
baby.
real. You know, I love the symbolism of the Rendon sword and how it's a symbol of monarchy. And it says here, I'm just going to read it because it's beautiful. A reminder that it is not blood that chooses the ruler of Alderaan. It is choice. Your father and I, we chose you to be our daughter and our future queen. And I want you to know, my love, that even though you are part of a family that has many obligations and duties that come with our privilege, you always have a right to a choice. Whoever you marry, it is your choice. And when you marry, I will strap the sword around your waist before you go to meet your husband or your wife. I love that. That is what the Rindon sword represents to all of Alderaan, but to rulers especially, that we have the freedom to choose our own fate, and we have the skill and the weapons needed to defend it.
I love that.
I love it. I love this
Yeah.
idea of the right to choice, right? And it's going back to our conversation on joy, right? Like Leia can accept joy in her life as long as she chooses to do so. She can
Mm-hmm.
choose Han to be her husband. She can choose to be defined by Vader, or she cannot. She can reject that heritage. She can throw it to the side and say, I am not Vader. I'm the daughter of Bail Organa and Brea Organa. Like that is who I choose to be. In the Obi-Wan series, she chooses not to know much else besides about her biological parents. When Obi-Wan says, I could tell you more. And she's like, no, it's okay. I have what I need. Right. I have my parents over there. I'm good. I feel a sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's so important. Like, what do you see as the right of choice for Leia's journey in this book, beyond this book? Like, what is choice for her?
That's a great question. And I think you're right in everything that you said, but I also do think that it's a complicated question for her because her choice is to fight, to move forward, to marry who she loves, to be a leader. But in a lot of ways, I bet she doesn't feel like she has that choice because it's something that it feels so innate to who she is, if that makes sense. And having this choice, probably having and actively choosing to make this choice to get married to Han is probably one that feels a little foreign to her in some ways.
Yeah, realizing she has many choices that she wouldn't have thought were there as part of her journey in this book. I can choose joy. It's okay. The galaxy will always have problems, but I can choose in this moment to have a wedding or to dance with these people at my wedding and to be joyous, and to find love and to choose love. Even though marriage was never something that she thought of early on in her life, and she makes a point to say that, how she, the privacy of her love life would stay with her and her alone. Like she didn't want to give that piece of herself up to everybody else, or else there was nothing left of Leia. And so, she makes the choice to think that even though I thought I would give my whole life to service and that's it, I can actually choose to not do that and not give my entirety of my being over to politics and to this political banter that I have to put up with all the time, right? Like there's more to life than just that.
Yeah, and I think that's something she has to learn, or she begins to learn after making this choice to get married, is what she can keep to herself and what she can have for herself. because she has spent so much of her young adulthood doing everything for everybody else and making sure that everybody else is supportive. Again, finding that joy in safety as opposed to the safety in the joy.
Also, the choice to be better. I think that's a Luke quote from Battlefront 2 when he talks to Del Meeko, Iden Versio's husband.
Yeah.
He talks about choice in the video game, and I love that, right? Like the choice to be better, like the choice to do better. And the choice to be better comes at several parts in this book. As we think of Leia and Vader, there are so many moments where Vader comes through Leia. Like some of the actions and the feelings that Vader has in his own life and what has happened to him start to rear its head in Leia. And most importantly, or most profoundly, is chapter 6 of this book, which is just
thank
insane.
You for bringing it up.
One of the biggest things that I've seen happen in Star Wars in years with the character of Leia is this scene. It is just so powerful. I had to put the book down and I had to like message you. I was on a flight and I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. I'm like freaking out in my seat. I'm getting a little emotional. Walk us through what happens in chapter 6.
Somebody, Leia, stumbles upon somebody else's funeral pyre, Vader, and she has to deal with the fact that it happened like this, like that he had a funeral of sorts, and that this is somebody that she is, intimately connected to through these familial ties that she's only just found out about. And she says she would not cry for him. It made her glad that Bail was stardust and Vader was nothing but sooty mud. Her father would adrift in the heavens forever, and her torturer was scum on the bottom of her shoe.
That is rough. That is so rough.
There's a sense of rawness to those emotions that has a particular truth in them that I find really profound. And in her viewpoint, and just like for these characters, the way that she sees Bail and has come to terms with Bail's loss and has chosen to frame his death, and also how she thinks so little of Vader, and for fair reason. Scum on the bottom of her shoe. I just Beth.
Yeah, and let's make clear, like you just said, she's totally justified in how she feels about Vader. And there's dramatic irony to it from our perspective, because we know that the Leia we know would have loved Anakin as her father. Like she would have loved Anakin and Padme as her parents. We know that. We know that would have been the case, right?
Imagine the shenanigans that they would have gotten themselves into, and Leia and Padme would be like, "You guys again," and Anakin is there with the twins, like shrug emoji.
Yeah,
like they would have gotten up to some like ridiculous nonsense that would have made Padme so frustrated, and they would have been like an epic father-daughter pair.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of the tragedy with this chapter in particular, because she is so mad at Vader, and again, rightfully so. He tortured her. He helped with Tarkin to order the strike on Alderaan. He stole everything from Leia. And while Luke, on the other side of things, has had this really deeply emotional connection to Vader and was like there in his final moments and his final act of redemption, and he took the helmet off and he saw Anakin underneath. Leia picks up this helmet and there is nothing inside. She is expecting to see the face of Anakin, but it's just dust. It's ash, right? So all that she's literally left with is the mask of Vader. She doesn't know or have a visual of what Anakin looks like. And it's so heartbreaking because, like we're saying, we know that she would have loved Anakin Skywalker as a father. He would have been a great dad. He never got the chance to be a dad for Leia. But Leia has had great parents in Bail and Breha. But the moment here that is the most striking is when she is holding the helmet, echoing Kylo Ren with the helmet, the ashy helmet in The Force Awakens, right? It's so mind-boggling to think that Kylo and Leia, mother and son, have these moments with this helmet, these critical moments. And she says, "I'm glad you are dead. I will never forgive you. I hate you." And it says that something inside of her is rising like a flame, burning and choking her throat. And it really evokes that imagery of Anakin in flames, like things rising within him like a flame, choking on his throat, burning him alive on the sands of Mustafar when he yells at Obi-Wan, "I hate you." And so the parallelism there really hurts.
Yeah.
It's one of the most emotional things I've seen in a book, especially from Leia, but like in any Star Wars book, the scene is so powerful. Um, God, how did you feel reading that? "I hate you." Like her saying the exact same words as Vader.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I thought of. You totally got it, because I think that's a very clear parallel to the imagery I had seen before. But there's another quote from this chapter that I think is good. No matter what Luke said, no matter what her own blood proved, Vader was not her family. A family was chosen, not born. Bale and Breha had chosen her. She chose Mon and Luke and Chewie and all her friends, and she chose Han. And I think that's a really key element of how that choice with the Rindon sword that we were talking about a little bit ago applies to her life, and how she values the people around her. Anakin made choices that led to his rise as Vader, and Vader made choices as Vader that continued the suffering of others, and she is choosing not to accept that for herself as something that defines who she is. And I think that's a powerful choice that she makes. And she understands that the choices that she does make and can make are made out of love and made out of a sense of giving for others and to
Mhm.
others, and not in a sense of out of suffering or out of fear, or even out of longing in a negative sense.
And it goes back to the Rindon sword, right? It's a choice. You can choose your family. It's not dictated by blood. It connects to the Rise of Skywalker. Luke tells Rey some things are stronger than blood, right? And Rey is a character that was under Leia's guidance, um, and I think Leia gives that to Rey also. Like she takes all these lessons that she's learned in her life, choice being the most important. And I love how the idea of choice really did start with Breha Organa. And I love this little just addition to Leia's mythos, I guess, her character and her archetype, what that all means. Leia as a sister is really interesting as well. Um, her relationship with Luke in this book, and she's having. Speaking of choice, she's wondering, should I take the choice to go with Luke and explore the galaxy and learn how to be a Jedi, or do I choose Han and make that my family? Even though
Hmm.
Luke is my brother, and could he come with me? Could he come serve in politics? Like Bale had talked about the Jedi serving with the Republic. Look how that went. Uh, but she still wishes for some of that stability that allowed her family on Alderaan to flourish. And she's like, maybe I could have a youngling or two, and Luke could come to dinner, and they could have a dinner with their uncle, and like we could all be one big happy family. And there's a little bit of longing there for myself personally of, we wish that in the Star War, we could have that happily ever after, and that Ben Solo could have dinner with Luke every week. Once a week, Luke comes over, and Ben Solo never goes off to Jedi school, and Luke isn't necessarily strapped down by his duties as a Jedi, but that's just not reality. Luke is going to choose to become a Jedi, and Leia thinks to herself how lonely it must be. She thought she was among the last Alderaanians, but he was the last Jedi. Oof.
We love bringing the title back together of my favorite Star Wars movie too. But yeah, I mean, it is I
Mhm.
mean, they are together in that sense in their own loneliness. And it's kind of a sad Skywalker truth at the end of the day. Ouch. Ouch
Yeah.
express.
Leia's relationship with the Force has been something explored in many ways between The Last Jedi, The Rise of Skywalker, I think a little bit of in Bloodline, as well as Empire's End. At least in those, it's been alluded to. But yeah, it was interesting throughout the book how she's sitting in the climate simulator and she's trying to move the rocks, and she can't quite figure it out. And then by the end of the book, she is summoning the Edons on Maduras, and
Mm-hmm.
they come to her rescue, and she doesn't actually even summon them. She doesn't specifically order them to help. She just kind of looks into the deep ocean, and she makes no effort to control the force. And it says, quote, she simply existed within it, and in the deep silence it answered the one word she couldn't let go of: help.
Mm-hmm.
Has big Ezra Bridger using the Purgles at the end of Rebels energy, I gotta say.
Oh,
Which I love.
definitely. Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really fascinating how she goes on this journey in the book to understand that the force is not something she can control. It's something that she just has to exist in, because she realizes, like, oh, when I was trying to make the force work for me, I was actually emulating Vader, because Vader is somebody who used the force to his advantage and to hurt others. I don't know. It's fascinating how she kind of goes on this journey, and I think she is able to sort of separate the force from Luke during the book, and by the end of it, she sees it more as something that exists within herself in her own way, and that she's kind of used. Maybe she doesn't realize she's been using it her whole life in ways more of an empathetic nature, versus like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm a powerful force user, I can levitate things nature, which
Sure.
she's trying to do in the climate simulator. She's like trying to lift the rocks. Um, I think she's trying to figure out how the force exists within her, and I think she maybe sees the force as love. She sees the force as like assurance, um, as something that can like provide comfort in a way, versus something that she can use to be powerful.
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of important ideas within this conversation, because for me, the Force in Leia has been a complicated subject since pardon me, the Rise of Skywalker, in the way that Leia's experience with the Force, what we knew about her, shifted pretty dramatically. And so I know I'm one that is going to be looking at these texts and her experiences here within that lens, and that's not entirely fair to Leia the character, because she's not quite there yet in her personal journey. But I appreciate you kind of talking through that journey and ultimately talking about the Edons and how the force for her is not something that can be controlled, but something to exist within. It surrounds us and binds us, et cetera, et cetera. And she's kind of really emulating that idea in this climax of the book, as we're, needing help, as they're needing help. And I still find it complicated, her relationship with the Force in the story. But I agree with you in the sense that she does work to find her own identity with the Force within this story.
And as we start to transition over to Han and like what he goes through in this book, I think one of my favorite conversations in the book is when him and her are talking about the Force. This is before the Edons, and when she's actually able to leverage her Force sensitivities, and she just feels like, I can't. I'm not able to find it within myself like Luke can. They're trapped underwater. They're trying to escape using one of the transports, and the glass is caving in, and she thinks that maybe she can hold back the glass.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she can't, right? And she asks, like, what is the point of power if I cannot save the people I love? Which feels very Anakin of her, to ask that question.
Indeed.
But also she knows that she can't be Luke, and she can't walk away from her responsibilities elsewhere. She had already chosen her path as a rebel, and he was on a path to be a Jedi. And she is like understanding who she really is. And Han gives her like such great advice. He says, you say it's in your blood, and maybe you're right, but Luke's not Vader. So that means you don't have to be Luke. Luke had to dump
Mm-hmm.
his X-Wing in a swamp to find the Force. You just need to find your swamp. All I'm saying is you need to be yourself. Find your way to the Force if you even want to. And she says, I don't understand you. You're so good at saying exactly the wrong thing so often that I come to expect it. And then the perfect words just fall from your lips. And he says, I like to keep you on your toes.
Can we talk about like, hey, Brad, I think you need to find your own swamp.
The value in this conversation is that Han, who is not a Force user, is able to recontextualize what the Force means to Leia, who is a Force user.
Sure.
And him specifying you need to find your Force, because your Force is different than Luke's Force, then that's different than Vader's Force. Vader controlled. Luke is trying to find peace and calm. You are trying to connect with the natural, right? Connect with the
Mm-hmm.
Edons in a way that Ezra does with the Purgle. Um, And I think that's beautiful, as we are High Republic fans, and the High Republic is all about how different Force users view view the Force differently, and that is so important to each and every Jedi. And I think just the way that Han can contextualize this for her is so important for her journey. That will be important for years to come. Because she cannot be Luke, she cannot try to be Luke, and that's unfair to her to try to be Luke. They are two different people.
Yeah, and I have nothing more to add. I feel like that was a great conclusion to that idea, and I hope, you know, as much as that this is a kind of a storyline that with Leia I do often struggle with. I hope that it is continued to be explored, because books are great places to really dive into the nitty gritty of all of the aspects of these things, and there remains a sliver of my mind that is open,
Mm-hmm.
a crack in the door, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe, probably.
Well, we're talking about Han. Let's jump over to his character. I think there's quite a bit that he goes through in this book. Most importantly, the fact that he spent an entire year in carbonite. He lost a year of his life, which, like,
We don't talk about this enough. It's a whole year of his life, and I get it. He's not the protagonist. He is not Luke, middle name Skywalker, but this carbonite is really central to who he is after the fact, and I think it reframes his life in a different way. And I'd love to share a quote from when what he remembers from carbonite. It says, "The creeping silence and darkness still haunted him, the claustrophobic feeling of being utterly trapped in his own body. His vision blurred, and he vividly recalled the moment he realized that he had become temporarily blind from the process, the terror at being lost under his own skin." And how that affects him when he gets to Madurs, which is he's not a fan of the cold. This is bringing up all these memories for him that are not pleasant in any way. What was your reaction to, like, realizing we were talking about this in the book? Because mine was like, oh my God, I can't believe we're talking about this.
Well, it's been such a huge focus for the comics, especially War of the Bounty Hunters. Han and Carbonite trying to rescue him. You know, he's put up for auction by Kira and Crimson Dawn. I think it's fascinating
wait a second. Can we pause there? He was put up for auction. I haven't read these book comics. Put up for auction by Kira?
Yes. And it involves the Hutts. It involves the Empire. You know, secretly Leia, Lando, Chewie, all there trying to get him
by
out.
Kira. That's I genuinely did not know this until right now.
Very fascinating stuff. But that quote you just read, I'm curious, did he experience some sort of sense of consciousness in carbonite? Because I was always under the impression that it was like a deep sleep state, and I don't know if this is sort of like a lucent sleep, like a little bit of awake, a little bit of asleep, like, you know, anesthetics a bit. I don't know, it just seems like he does feel the claustrophobia of being a carbonite. It seems to me like maybe he drifted in and out of it for that year. And that is also, it makes it even more terrifying, because I think that is what this is getting out of it.
I think that, well, I mean, yeah, this does present a new idea. Like, I think that he was not conscious and, you know, aware for most of this, but I think that the process for him to be, like, actually frozen in the carbonite, maybe something went wrong with that, and he was stuck there for a bit before he actually went, like, unconscious, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, even if, I think you're right, like the majority of the time he was probably asleep, but even if he was awake for 10 minutes during that year in carbonite,
Right.
imagine how terrifying those 10 minutes are. So I think that's what really hit me here, was like, oh shit, like he might have actually experienced that creep, like he says, the creeping silence, the darkness of carbonite. Like, imagine just being trapped in a specific pose for an entire year, and you just drift in and out, and every time you come to, it's dark. You don't know what's going on, and you just go back to sleep, and you're cold, right? That's terrifying to think about. It's really bad. It's really bad for Han, and I understand the trauma. Why he would hate going to a planet like Madurs. Like, he has a little bit of post-traumatic stress from it.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel for him. And I'm glad we explore this. And even getting a little bit from Leia's perspective too about how it really had only been a couple weeks since Jabba's palace. And she thinks about all the stuff that she went through in that year, including the scar on her arm, which is from Commander Zara, which is Charles Soule's Star Wars comic when they fight in that run. You know, she thinks about meeting Kira. She thinks about the words "I love you" lingering on her for so long, like a chain around her heart, and she didn't really have the sense of closure. So I think that was a very taxing year for both of them.
Yeah.
And yeah, just realizing like, oh yeah, it really only has been like, you know, when we watch Return of the Jedi, like we don't really think of that enough. And it really has
No.
only been like a couple days that he has been back.
Yeah, and not only that, they're immediately getting married right after that, and you're like, okay, wait, let's think about why this is happening, right? The war is over, and they love each other, they know, and now let's make it capital O official, Facebook official, photos and everything. And that's a big deal, but I imagine that losing a year of your life and waking up and not feeling like yourself really propels you into a state of, as Rose Tico would say, saving what you love, and preserving that and taking advantage of that, and making sure that those around you know that they're loved. And that comes, with a particular veracity when it comes to your fighting, but also when it comes to intimacy and admiration for another person and making that official.
I think also the year that he spent in Carbonite gives him a little bit of a different outlook on life.
Yeah.
And we talked about this with Beth. We were saying that he's living more in the present versus worrying about the future. Han is somebody who has learned that any day should not be taken for granted, because you could be frozen in a slab of carbonite for an entire year and lose your life. I think that's something that is very relatable to what we're going through, where we've been living in a pandemic for 2+ years now. And so it feels like we have lost 2 years of our lives and counting. So I think with that in mind, at least I've been more mindful of living in the present and not taking things for granted. Han seems like somebody who, as he's talking with Leia, and Leia's dealing with her own secrets, and she's worried about the future and being like, oh, what if my secret comes out and people will look at me different, and my position in the government will be recalled. And he says that, quote, "It seems to me you're wasting all your precious time worrying about the future. Maybe the galaxy finds out, maybe it doesn't. Right now, we have a prime minister to work around, one thing at a time." I think one thing at a time. I don't know if that's like the way that Han would have thought previously, like living in the present. I feel like he is somebody who, being a smuggler, I think you always have to think one step ahead and worry about what's going to happen and think about the woulda, coulda, shouldas. And it seems now that Han has gone through this, he has changed his outlook on life, much like at least I have changed a little bit in my outlook on things, and like taking it each step at a time, one day at a time, and worrying about like what's in my control and like what I can do now with my life versus like what things could look like, because things could change on a dime, right? And we've seen that these last couple of years is what I'm trying to get at. Do you feel like that is a change in mindset for Han, like living in the present?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what propels them to get married when they do, and to take action on that and to not waste any more time. And speaking of that wedding, let's talk about it, because we have this whole first 100 pages or so that take place on Endor. And it is, the whole book is great, but perhaps the most delightful part of this book and the most heartwarming part of this book, because they're in love and we're just after this big battle that we all know and see and really know well, and on a setting that we know well, and we get to see it in a new way for the first time in book form, learning more about the Ewoks, learning more about their internal monologues, learning more about the party and the ceremony. I loved so much about this part of the book was how much the ways that the Ewoks and the humans and our rebellion friends in general, how their traditions intertwined, for better or for worse. Let's talk about perhaps for worse, question mark, to begin with. And that has to be the bachelor party before the wedding here, when it gets a little out of hand because the Ewoks were not invited. Did you love this, or did you love this? Question mark. Answer, yes.
Yes, it was amazing.
Good, correct answer.
Ewoks, the Ewoks are party animals. They go hard. I love how they show up. They realize they were not invited, and then they're like, "Hey, there's a condor dragon here. We gotta go find it." And they're like, "Oh, that sounds really serious, scary." And as they're looking for the condor dragon, more and more Ewoks just keep sneaking into the door, into the party, and then they're hanging off Chewie's arm. And then Chief Sherpa's like, "Oh, I guess the condor dragon's gone. Oh wait, how did all those Ewoks get in there?"
Wait, and weren't they like offended that they were had a party and like they were not initially invited?
Yeah, yeah, they were. They were not happy, and 3PO was also like telling them that they're like, "Yeah, you should have invited them, Han." Han's
Get it
like,
together, buddy.
Han's like, "We've got to get Yub Nub Commander out of there," and Luke's like, "They're kind of cute. I love Luke. I love Luke so much. Like, this is really like the Luke who is still, not
Himbo
totally
King.
stoic. Yeah, he's not like totally stoic and emotionless like he is, and like when he becomes like the Jedi myth that he tries to
Right,
embrace during the
right.
Mandalorian time, and he's got real responsibility, so he's got to be the adult. Here it feels like he's still that really like optimistic, silly Luke who's just like, "Oh yeah, the Ewoks are so cute. I
He's
love them."
me circa February 2020. I'm gonna graduate college. It's gonna be so great. I'm just gonna be thriving, and then yeah, and then he realizes there's a whole Jedi myth out there that he has to embrace or is choosing to
Yeah,
embrace. Anyway, so that's for worse perhaps for how much alcohol they had to purchase, but for better for the shenanigans and the fun. And there's a great quote. It says Han was starting to suspect the Ewoks had a higher tolerance for alcohol than he'd originally assumed. Although perhaps they were so chaotic naturally that a little liberation via libation really didn't make a difference.
makes me think of human cyborg libations from the Lego Star Wars
Oh my
special.
gosh, my favorite joke in all of that special is whatever the droid's name is,
Yeah.
human cyborg libations. Incredible,
Yes.
genius. 10 out of 10.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. The bachelor party, I like the fact that Lando's there too. Like, perfect. I'm loving that Lando is at Han's bachelor party. Like, of course, and like they have some great banter, and the fact that he gives Han an outfit that he says is from Alderaan, but really isn't. And then Leia's like, "Huh, it must have been Lando's
Played
fault."
him so hard. What a mess. Like,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, and then from there we get to like the real good of the union of Han and Leia, and essentially the cultural union between the Ewoks and our rebellion friends. And there's this beautiful art of this wedding scene that was put out on the day of the book's release, and it is stunning and colorful and vibrant and soft and warm and sweet, and everything that this scene really gets into. And I loved it so much, and I found it hilarious at the same time, which just felt right. Did you feel the same way about the Endor wedding ceremony?
It was beautiful. I love the setting. I love the great tree and how it's this like really important piece of Ewok culture, and it makes sense to have the wedding there, like all these beings connected in one place, experiencing joy together. I love that Mothma is like the truest friend to Leia. That was one thing I took away from this book was how close they are.
Mama.
Um, Even though Leia feels like she's kind of looked at as a maybe a sister or even a younger daughter in some instances by Mothma, because Mothma trumps her in age. But I love that there's a little bit of kinship there and understanding from Mothma that like you have to be a person, you have to choose to have this wedding, you deserve it, and I'm gonna throw you a great time. Like they're gonna have these little butterflies in the area, which got me thinking of Ben Solo riding those little blue butterflies.
Misties.
The Misties. Yeah, I don't know if they're the Misties exactly, but they're pretty close. They're pretty close. At least that's how I visualize them a little bit. From the
Oh,
Ewok movies.
100%.
Yeah,
I think that's a pretty clear bring over into into canon in
yeah,
the best way. And I think one of the most beautiful things of the ceremony is like when the amber is creating their rings. And just
yes,
thinking about the way that the force works and the way that the world works. And I love the pairing of nature and these two people who are so distant from nature in their lives, with politics and with smuggling, and they're out in space, they're in tall buildings, but they're not amongst nature often in this way. And so it was just like a really lovely, sweet, thoughtful thing.
Well, yeah, and the fact that her ring breaks later on is pretty
Right.
important.
Mm-hmm.
But part of that is realizing, no matter what happens to the ring, she'll be okay. So as much as the ring is symbolic of this union, and the fact that it does break, I think it's a test of the marriage to say like, hey, the ring broke, but it doesn't mean that like we're broken as a pairing. It's like we have so much more future left. So it's interesting how the ring starts off as a breakable thing and then becomes something that Han gives her at the end, which we've talked about earlier in this episode. The symbolism behind that ring, but it's very important to Leia.
Right. And very serious question I'm about to ask you here. I'm going to transition just a little bit. Very serious question. Utmost seriousness. You're just going to prepare yourself for the severity of this serious question.
Okay.
And imagine your dream wedding. Okay. You're getting married to the love of your life. It's a perfect, beautiful day. Are you chanting "Nub you Ben"?
Yeah.
Nub you.
Absolutely.
You Ben. Is that the pinnacle of romance for you?
Yeah. A bunch of Ewoks doing a chant at your wedding. Yeah. Sign me up.
In which you and your fiance have to chant back, and you don't know what it means.
Yes. No, 100%. Sign me up.
Right.
My new conspiracy is Ben Solo is not named after Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ben Kenobi. He is named after this chant because they're going YOO-BEN, Ben, you Ben. So I think maybe when Leia gave birth, there was an Ewok in the delivery room, and the Ewok goes, "You Ben," and then Leia goes, "Yeah, you Ben, you are Ben Solo. That's your name."
Oh my god,
that's my new theory.
this, but not the end. I just imagine Wicket in the delivery room, like holding Leia's hand. Han's also there, but for some reason, Wicket the Ewok is there, and he's like, "You Ben."
Yeah. And Nub you, is Nub you supposed to be like a Ewok version of love you? And then like you Ben is like you bet, love you, you bet.
I have no idea. Because the song is called Yup Nub. I don't know what it means.
Yeah, I gotta find out what Yup means.
Does anybody know the Ewok language? Can I Duolingo it?
Yeah, we'll find out. Add it to Duolingo.
Serious questions today.
Yeah. Okay, I really need to talk about Luke's speech because I think this is the best part.
Please do. Get back to the actual thoughtful parts of this.
But Luke's speech, it says here, quote, "When I saw Leia for the first time, she spoke of hope, and that is what she has always embodied for me. Obi-Wan told me that those we love are never truly gone. None of the people we love are ever truly gone. You will sense them again. Their presence exists in moments of love and joy." There you go again, joy. "Of quiet and peace. And so I ask for a moment of silence. Let us remember those who cannot be here, no matter how much they would have wished to share in the celebration of this day."
I'm crying again. Yeah. And I am trying not to cry in the episode. I'm doing really good. Ugh,
the fact that Luke Skywalker shows up on Crate, finds his sister, and utters words that he said at her wedding. Like, that has a whole new meaning to it. And also those words specifically being from Obi-Wan Kenobi, right?
Don't look at me.
That is rough. I think it's a beautiful recontextualization of The Last Jedi, and that moment that him and Leia share where he gives her the dice, and thinking back to the wedding of, hey, we at the wedding thought about all the people we've lost, and we had that moment of silence for those people. And like in Leia's mind, right, like at her wedding, she feels the right-on sword being put on her. She feels Bail's cheek against hers. And so for Luke to utter these words again to her and give her the dice from Han, I got to imagine, in that moment, she feels Han's presence in some sense, right? Like, does she feel Han's hands touching hers, or does he feel his hand on her shoulder when she has the dice in her hands? And they aren't even real dice, right? They're fake. They're the illusion dice that Kylo grabs and and they go away.
I'm crying in the episode, guys.
Yeah.
My eyeballs are moist. Yeah, I mean, just thinking about it, I haven't gone back and watched TLJ since having read this book, but I feel like I have to because it picks so many great moments from TLJ and elevates them with the ring and with this moment. Um, gives them new life in a way that already elevates something great, you know?
Yeah.
Oof.
It's just a brutal moment. It's heart-wrenching, but I love it. A
Mhm.
beautiful speech by Luke.
Yeah.
Luke should officiate more weddings. It's my thought.
I think he could have a good psychic officiating weddings. And I mean, being a Jedi is being part of a religious order, so makes sense.
Could do like a little side hustle, you know?
Exactly.
He didn't have to run off to
Exactly.
Octo. He could have just become a wedding officiator in Vegas. He'd make a lot of money.
Right. On Canto Bite, perhaps?
Yeah.
You know, there's
Who
got to be
knows?
like a chapel on Canto Bite he could have just hung out in. Charge
Yeah.
people a flat fee for their, all-inclusive wedding package.
Yeah. I agree. I think we're
Anyway.
onto something here.
Anyway.
I think we're onto a new Star Wars adventure. New book
Exactly.
coming next year. Luke, the wedding officiator.
We're gonna workshopping the title. Title not final.
But hey, let's jump over to something else location wise in this book, the Halcyon, which, as we talked about earlier, yes, it is the corporate synergy of it all, but it is a fun location for a honeymoon to be had.
You know what? We do a podcast about the thing, which means we are 110% buying into the corporate synergy of it all. So whatever, bring it on,
It is what it is. It is what
bring
it
it
is.
on. Here we are.
What I do love, Riola says a fundamental principle of flying on the Halcyon is the idea that the journey is more important often than the destination. And if that's not Lego summer vacation vibes, what isn't or what is? Because that is straight from the Lego special, and that's how you know the corporate synergy is happening. Because that idea that the destination is not as important as the journey is prevalent amongst all these projects. But I do
Yeah.
love that. I do love, as we think about it within the characters' context, the lessons that they learn is very important. It's not necessarily the destination Sinjax, which they were going to, that was important, the beach vacation. It was the journey, the side journey to Midor's and all the things that happened on board the Halcyon.
Yeah, I think that there are some great things happening on board the Halcyon. I really find that the Sabacc game played in the engine room was enjoyable and interesting to follow. I'm wondering if the etching of Han and Leia's initials can be seen when you go into that space. I would hope so. Thinking about it. Also, I would still like to know the number of the suite they were in. We are still waiting on that. Not yet canon. We'll find out maybe eventually, maybe one day. I also think it's great that we have a character like Riola, who is somebody you can find on the Halcyon if you or I go on that. Again, that's the corporate synergy of it all, but I like how it fleshed out her character a bit more and gave us a better understanding of who she was within her job and within her like point of view on life. I thought that was really interesting. Also, something that was mentioned in the interview, I was like, Leia goes, this is the best view on the ship. More people should be able to see it with regards to the
The command deck. The command deck. Yeah.
yeah, thank you. Command deck, whatever. And Beth was like, I think you're the first person to pick up on that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the reason why you or I or anyone else going to the Halcyon today in the sequel trilogy timeline is able to go do their bridge command, their bridge command,
Oh yeah.
like part, the word just was not happening in my mind.
I can't believe you didn't remember that.
It's okay. Do that activity while you're on there is because Leia said that more people should be able to go on there. And I was like, you know what? That works for me.
And
But
also that she said it wasn't just for the view, it was for also appreciating the people who make the ship run, right? Like she's thinking about
yeah,
the people first. Like, hey, let the people on the ship see who runs it and appreciate their work.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that illuminates her point of view as well, in a thoughtful manner. I don't know. I thought the inclusion of the Halcyon and the way it was brought in, especially with Mon encouraging them to go on it. They're like, I will give you the tickets. It's good for Chandrila. It's good for the New Republic. I thought all of that backstory for for the story was really good and interesting and makes me want to go on the Halcyon even more now, even though I don't have the money and don't expect to have the money anytime soon. That's for sure.
I think she realizes some of the problems with it too, in some ways. I think at one point she's recognizing that there's a lot of aristocrats and wealthy merchants and influential celebrities on the ship, and she sees how they're pretending like nothing is wrong, and she understands that these people have never felt the quote boot heel of the Empire on their necks. And so I think, when she's thinking about the working class on the ship, the people of the ship, and how we should be on the bridge to see them, she recognizes a little bit of that disparity, and that the people who are able to afford this luxury and go on the Star Cruiser are very wealthy, and not necessarily people she would typically hang out with. And even the HoloNet news is pokes a little bit of fun at her, saying like, hey, Princess Leia was spotted on the Halcyon with a bunch of other people who don't have to worry about what's happening in the galaxy right now, right? And she turns off the news when she hears that. So there's a little bit of complication there as well, where she has this cognitive dissonance between like, I should be doing my job, but like also I'm kind of enjoying this luxury right now at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how do I deal with that? How do I align those objectives?
Yeah, and it's complex, and like that's a really fair conversation for her to be having, especially in the time frame when she's going.
And I think it's why she wants to go to Madurs as well. She's like, how can I make this trip part of my job besides just for myself?
Right. I can't handle it. But also she kind of has an important mission at hand that she would like to accomplish while she's there. Speaking
of going to Madurs and incorporating some important work into their vacation, Madurs, original planet, so much fun to be here.
So cool.
And it's such an interesting planet with the art and the architecture, and how this place used to house Art Expo, who I believe Palpatine had visited a couple times, and Cranium is like the big export of this planet. Madurs' independence, they had a big boom prior to the Imperial takeover. Prime Minister Durand Jens, he's like a long-serving guy who's really beloved by everybody. So they really got a good thing going for him on this planet. Except everything comes crashing down, so to speak, when this orbital station plants itself in the old city, destroys everything, all because Jens was not willing to give up their export, the Cranium, and allow them to reap the planet of its resource, but they end up doing it anyways and polluting the entire place.
Yeah, everything changed when the Empire came to town.
Oof.
Yeah.
Giving me big Fire Nation coming to the South Pole vibes.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, doing their own thing until everything changed. And this really puts all of them in major jeopardy. And it was so sad because there's this conversation of we can't necessarily save the place. Even now, it feels like it's gone too far. The mining, the stripping of the planet of its resources. And we just have to save the people. And we can find the art and create the art elsewhere in new ways and tell new stories with that art. And I think that feels really complicated for me as a reader, because we've just been introduced to this new place that has this new culture and idea, and it's a place full of beauty and thoughtfulness and intrigue and humanity that gets utterly destroyed because of the Empire's selfishness and lack of consideration. What were your thoughts about what the Empire was doing and how the Halcyon and the Leia and everyone was responding to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's terrible. We've seen so many worlds destroyed under the Empire, and I think Leia is in a desperate attempt to not watch another world die. She already watched Alderaan explode, and that was enough for her, reasonably so. And so I think for her, it's a deeply personal mission, right? It like goes beyond the let's bring these people into the New Republic. And now it's becoming I have to save a whole world from dying, right? And
Mm-hmm.
something that she's really intrigued by when she first gets there is this ice painting that's called the Broken Galaxy, and it's something that really sticks in her mind, and she's so enraptured by it originally. And it's this it's this black painting or black ice sculpt painting. It has etched white lines in it with this pendulum that's swinging back and forth, and it's carving small cracks. And there's a heater that melts away the cracks and melts away the damage. And the point of this piece is to show that not art is not static. And then this piece is getting weaker and weaker over time. But Leia's like, well, what if you just don't smash the pendulum into it? And what if you just don't break the whole thing, right? And I think that's this whole point of art on this planet, is to show that, like, nothing lasts forever and everything passes. And I think that just doesn't vibe with Leia. She's like, no, I want to save this planet, like, no matter what like what we can do, like what can we do here to make this work. It is kind of the old city. The old city becomes an art piece of its own, even though it's destroyed and demolished. Like, it sits there as a remembrance of what happened at the hands of the Empire, and that, like, art is temporary, and ice melts and ice breaks and ice cracks, just like this old city, and just like everything else here. And art has a function, basically.
Yeah, and it's also saying, like, the thing that the art is saying now is not necessarily the thing that the art needs to say tomorrow or in 10 years from now. And by recognizing art as temporary, you recognize that, like, the meaning of art changes over time too. And I think that that is really interesting and like a progressive idea of art. This painting, the Broken Galaxy that you mentioned, I mean, it's gonna be gone, and that has something to say. And I think that it's almost a critique on the way that we have art in museums and the way that we present art as it is, because we have so many old paintings and sculptures, and they say something about the particular time and place. And some of them are deteriorating. Some of them have to be placed in very particular settings in order to not fall apart or need, deep restoration on them, because we have a desire to preserve these things. But then there are other pieces that specifically exist to go away, or exist to be temporary, and or constantly moving, both either, literally or metaphorically. And those pieces, the fleetingness of them is, I think, really valuable to the conversation about art, is what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm.
I could talk about art itself forever, so I'm not going to do that. But, come back around anytime. I have conversations about art.
We talked about this with Beth too in our interview, and just the idea of art being a form of rebellion. And Leia thinks this specifically when she thinks it was the power of art to exist even in the darkest times, to silently stand in opposition to the destroyers, right? And I guess when you think of something silently standing, I do think of the old city, right? It's still there, it's still present, it silently stands there as a reminder of what this place used to be, right? And I think for the people that are there, it serves as a symbol of, like, we're not going to let this happen again, right? It's why they have this sort of underground network that can't be detected, and they have all these secret harpooners down there who are still hunting for resources. And
Mm-hmm.
even all the architecture of the planet, they use the cranium or the carnium, the cranium. They use their brains to create the architecture, that's for sure. But they use their own resource, and they try not to let go of it. But unfortunately, the Empire is mining for it and polluting the waters and ruining the natural environment. It's horrible. It's really horrible. And fortunately, they're able to save the planet, and using this gravity technology that we'll talk about in our odds and ends. But I think the Madoras as a location, like, once we got there, I think you referenced it earlier, the book kind of slowed down a bit once we got to Madoras, and we start to peel back what's actually happening there. I
The
was
onion,
like, oh yeah, this
the
is really
layer.
good stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, I
it
agree.
was really exciting to see it all play out. Alicia Beck, who is from Smuggler's Run, a Han Solo and Chewbacca adventure by Greg Rucka, makes a triumphant return. It was all connected.
It's all connected. Yeah, and I what I loved about so much about this setting is we get so much of the world between the residences where Han and Leia are staying while they're there, and the old city, and like the ice or snowy landscapes that they're gliding over, and then under the ice, and this whole architecture from the Empire and just the whole culture under the ice too. It's a really dynamic place, and I feel like we got to see a lot of it, and it's a place I'd be interested in exploring further because it is so unique and dynamic. Like, it feels like some of the planets we
Mhm.
go to often are really one note, and then that's not necessarily a dig. Like, they all had to have one climate, and we don't dive a lot into the culture of many of the planets that we visit. But Madurs itself has a really kind of dynamic and exciting and um, thoughtful construction, and I would love to explore it further. Before we get to our odds and ends, I would love to just quickly touch on the end of the book itself and that final chapter we get between Han and Leia. Guys, if you haven't listened to the audiobook final chapter, you need to do that right now. I am not joking. It's so great and has a special surprise in it. What did you think about how this book ended for these two characters?
I love it. I think it was again, it was great to see Leia being the one to suggest that they stay in for a night, because I don't think Leia at the beginning of the book would have suggested that. She would have been, at a cocktail party and trying to cozy up to the people there, or trying to win them over to her side, right? And so here
Mhm.
she is actually making the choice. We talked a lot about choice to find joy, and to experience joy, and to experience the safety of joy, right? Because she now has gotten to a point where she's with her husband, she's done her job, she's saved the planet, and she's joyous because of that, and she is finding safety in that, right? She's not experiencing safety because she's on the Halcyon. She is experiencing safety because she's with Han in this moment,
Yeah.
right here and
Yeah.
now.
And I think like the banter in this chapter is so great. There's a moment on 343 that's the penultimate page here. And they talk about Chewie's cleaning up the Falcon a little bit. And she's like, that'll be nice. And he goes, it wasn't that bad. He goes, and I'm adding a kitchen area. And she barks with laughter. A kitchen? What? I thought you'd like, do you think I can cook? So this is something that gets planted like right in the beginning of the book about like what updates he's going to make, or like maybe I can get our kitchen. And it comes back right in the final moments here. And I found this to be so funny because one, it's like breaking down like a real life stereotype here, but two, like her reply is just like, oh, and you read that and you're like, men, LOL. And I thought that was great.
She's like, I'll be sure to burn you a nice piece of toast, maybe.
Right. Canon toast, guys.
Yeah, it is
Canon.
toast. It is toast in Star Wars still. Love that. Love that so
Right.
much.
So I just thought this was like a perfectly pitched ending.
Yeah. I love how it didn't necessarily have to end super, super flashy, super,
Yeah, it was
super
quiet.
big. Didn't have to have like the big, like triumphant moment. It was just quiet. And between these two characters in their bedroom, and they're just having fun, being kind of mushy, and also being kind of, poking fun at each other at the same time. So I think that's like the perfect way a Han and Leia romance should end. Han and Leia, I love them so much. I love them. They have my whole heart. But with that being said, let's move into our odds and ends here. So these are things that we didn't quite get to during the episode. Small Easter eggs, funny little moments. Let's go through our lists, Sarah. So why don't you kick us
Alrighty.
off?
Okay, did you know that unmarried Ewok males lived in huts on the ground? They, quote, hadn't won a spot in the family home in the trees.
Oh,
Just a little Ewok culture for you.
yeah. For me, it says here that crime lords were known to buy cruise ships and turn them into traveling casinos to have betting
Oh my
happen in
gosh.
hyperspace, to avoid paying taxes and fees. And is this not literally Vranke's Casino and Hotel in the Vox cluster as part of Star Wars Resistance?
Oh my gosh. You really
Speaking of
just were
space
like,
casinos,
you were really like,
yeah.
Sarah, I'm going to bring up the Vox Vortex 5000.
Well, Vranke is a crime lord. He's a Hutt. So like, of course. So I
so
just think that was really
right.
interesting. Yeah.
You were so right. Are you ready for my next one?
Yes, please.
I'm going to put on my best Mark Thompson. Pronto, Ronto. keep that in. It was terrible. But Wazak Grimkin, he is an engineer in the engineering room, and he wants everybody to get out. Pronto, Ronto.
Pronto, Ronto. I'm going to use that more often. Yeah. I'll make a couple quick ones here. Cass Dameron obviously does show up in the book and makes a mention of Shara, who is Poe Dameron's mom and dad. We love that. There's also another fun name drop. Leia name drops General Draven when speaking to Major Neoma, and how General Draven had said good things about Neoma. So General Draven being the one from Rogue One who talks with Cassian Andor and orders the killing of Galen Erso, and is prominently featured in that film. And I hope we see him in Andor.
I hope so.
Come on, Draven. Show up, please.
He's got the mustache, right?
No, that's the X-Wing pilot. Draven's got like blonde hair though. He's the guy in the meeting room.
I'm putting these two guys together in my mind. I'm so sorry to these two men. My next one is another short one, so get ready for it. It's the alcohol Boga Noga.
Yeah.
Guys, Boga mentioned, apparently the Hutts have it, and it is very potent, very high alcohol content, and disgusting.
We mentioned that the Journey to the Force Awakens Smuggler's Run book was called back to with Commander Beck in this book, but also Operation Yellow Moon got a shout out. This is a operation in which Leia planned a distraction mission to prepare for the attack on Endor. So to basically move some of the Imperial presence off the planet. This is in the book Moving Target by Cecil Castellucci and Jason Fry. So have not read that book, but I need to.
I read it years ago. I've read most everything. Anyway, next one is another one that made me cry. I definitely totally cried. Leia was dancing with a young rebel fighter named Kyrell, who was wearing a black Jellucan armband of mourning. What am I supposed to say about that? What am I supposed to say about that? Oh, guys. Okay. Lost Stars. Thane Kyrell. One half of the protagonists of the story. They are star-crossed lovers, essentially, who both start out in the Empire, and Thane makes his way to the Rebellion after the Death Star, and Sienna stays in the Empire. That's it.
That was a great inclusion. Very happy about that one. So this is,
I cried. It punched me in the face. My gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. I love him being there. So we also have Lando, who says to Han, "I can't believe you're settling down." And then Han says, "Just following Chewie's example." And then Lando says, "And a lucky woman Mala is," which that might be the first time Mala is mentioned in canon, I believe. Maybe in Life Debt by Chuck Wendig. I can't remember. But that was great. I love that. Chewie's a Wookiee, a married Wookiee man. So gotta respect that.
My next one is a mention of Galen Erso, Keelad, who is endlessly annoying. God bless. Keelad says that he should have won the Ashgod Prize for his invention of the BCL 500 tractor beam, but it, quote, went to Erso instead.
Ooh.
Yikes. Do I sense?
Galen Erso.
Do I sense a feud?
Maybe. Yeah. I would love to be in the room when Galen won that award and Keelad didn't. Like, did Keelad storm out? Was he angry? Was he upset? I hope so.
Strikes me as petty.
Yeah. Speaking of Keelad, here's my next odds and ends. So he uses this tractor beam technology at the end of the book to push and pull the moon's core. It only works because Maduras is an aquatic planet, so the water flows easier than dirt or stone. And again, it's his invention, and it is a thermal oscillator that he will install on the moon using cranium plating. Originally, this was designed for use, what he hoped would be used on a major space station. He even had a buyer on Synjax. And the words thermal oscillator, Sarah, have only ever been used in reference to Starkiller Base. And Keelad is saying this technology wanted to be used for a space station. I believe he eventually will sell this technology to a buyer, and that buyer will be the First Order. And they're going to use the thermal oscillator technology to house the cores on Starkiller Base. So I don't know that for certain, but the thermal oscillator has a very specific connotation to it.
Alrighty, I had no idea.
So
okay.
Keylad, if you didn't hate him already, he's the cause of Starkiller Base, probably. So he sucks.
Thanks for nothing, Keylad. Janray Tessamine name dropped as an artist who survived Alderaan's destruction and has worked on rebellion propaganda, who was also friends with reporter Corey Selgroth, who is Amy Ratcliffe's original reporter character from a certain point of view, Empire Strikes Back. And I was like,
Yay!
Oh my gosh. We were in the car at that point and I was like, Brad, highlight it. So yeah, I found it to be a very exciting inclusion. Shout out to Beth for just bringing everything in.
Yeah. And shout out to Amy. I hope that moment of discovery for her was joyous. Like, I hope she just was like, oh my God.
Absolutely.
'Cause that's awesome. That's awesome. So cool. Mm-hmm. So we each have two more. So let's just rapid fire them off. Mine are both Empire Strikes Back references. And there's first of which is Tauntaun slander. I don't appreciate it, Han. But he's talking about Tauntauns and before they're going to Madurs. And he's like, have I mentioned how bad those things smell? Leia says, maybe once or twice. Because it's bad. And she goes, I've heard. He goes, the inside is worse than the outside. And then she says, yes, that has also been confirmed. I thought that was like just super funny. And then lastly here, Han was thinking about Leia at his bachelor party and how he couldn't remember not wanting her more than after Leia and Luke kissed on Hoth. And Luke says, let's never speak of that again. And Han says, never. And I just think it's great because this is the first like true acknowledgement of that kiss in canon. So I just love how, they're both like, yeah, we're just going to forget about that. Like, we recognize that it happened and we move on with our lives. So,
and we recognize that we happened. And what have we were talking about? I've never heard of that before. My final two are some that you were not going to be surprised to hear from me if you know me. So my first is higher institutions of learning. We have two here. A student from the University of Barleth wrote a thesis on the moon of Madurs. And then we also have the University of Genrand on Mon Cala was the best for underwater sciences. Guys, we've got options here in the galaxy. I love to see it. And then my final one has to do with something very important. Food. And just the quote, food would be good. Some of that brown stuff, it was delicious. Okay, so we get the food, gives me a little bit of Niku vibes because nobody loves food more than Niku. But then also stuff, it's delicious, gives me Beauty and the Beast vibes. Even though it's the gray stuff that's delicious, this is the brown stuff that's delicious. I'm counting it as a connection. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a deep cut. I would not have known that. So kudos to you for
try the gray
it.
stuff. It's delicious. Don't believe me? Ask the dishes. Anyway.
Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. So again, Princess and the Scoundrel is available now. Sarah and I, we love the book. A lot of fun. I think more romance should be in Star Wars. I hope we get more of these sorts of stories told in the future. Mm-hmm. And I love Star Wars romance. That's all I can really say. I have nothing else to add.
I am pro kissing in Star Wars. So whenever they want to do more of that in book form, in movie form, in TV form, call me. I'm ready to see it, read it. That's great stuff. More in the Star War, please. Maybe we can make it Star Kiss. I don't know.
Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. And we hope you enjoyed this discussion around Princess and the Scoundrel, which is available now. Hopefully not the last Casey Star Wars romance that we get, but also a romance novel that had a lot of heart and a lot of stuff to say about the characters within them, as we have discussed today for almost 2.5 hours. So we hope you enjoyed this episode as well. And stay tuned for more here on the podcast. Follow Sarah and I on all of our socials, as well as the podcast, wherever you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, you name it. And make sure you're following the podcast so all of our future episodes drop right into your podcast feed.
We are going to be doing the High Republic soon and Andor soon. So we hope that you join us for those adventures because they should be fun ones. And we have a Patreon where tiers start at just $1, and we are endlessly grateful for our patrons. So thank you to Amy, Brian with an I, Brian with a Y, Cheryl, Clay, Danny, Davis, Dylan, Johnny, Huang, Jen, Knights of Ren, Leanne, Levi, Lucy, Lindsay, Randy, Rob, Skaber Bouquet, Sky Talkers, Stephen, Travis, Tom, and T. Thank you all very much. And thank you to everyone who listens for your support and just for spending a couple hours with us. We appreciate you a bunch.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you once again. And until next time, everybody, may the force be with you always.
Bye.